Hello, my name is Amanda Hurtado, and I will be discussing my case country of Colombia. Here is the outline for this presentation. First, I will be going over the background information on Colombia. Then we will move on to geography, political conflict, U.S. intervention, the drug war, and lastly, my own personal experiences in Colombia. I will be going over some of the most complicated and darker themes on Colombia. That being said, there are many more factors to this country that I was not able to get into that I would encourage you to look into. Colombia is a very beautiful and diverse country. So, some background information on Colombia. The current president is Iván Duque Marquez. The capital of Colombia is Bogotá. They have a population of 50.5 million and is the third most populous Latin American country. They have an adult literacy rate of 94.65%, which does not deviate much between the males and the females. The life expectancy is 77.19 years. The official language of Colombia is Spanish, where it's spoken by 99% of the population, but there are some islands that speak mostly English, and there are some areas that speak Creole languages. The main religion of Colombia is Roman Catholic, which comprises 79%, and the second largest is Protestant, comprising 14%. Our first topic we will get into is geography. So where is Colombia? Colombia can be found in the northern tip of South America. It is the only country in South America with borders on both the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. It is divided up into 5 different regions that all have different identities. The Caribbean region, at the north, is the most colorful and festive region. The Pacific region, in the purple, is the rainiest region and is comprised of mostly Afro-Colombian people. The Andean region, which is in the center in the brown, contains most of the population and is considered the business district. It also includes the capital of Bogotá, which is in the center. They also have the tallest palm trees in the world here, and most of the coffee grown in Colombia is also done here. The Orinoco region, in the light green, is where most of the agriculture and ranching is done. And the Amazonian region, which is in the south, in the dark green, contains around 3% of the population, in which most are natives, and some tribes or groups may not even be documented yet. 10% of the world's biodiversity is also found just in this region. Colombia used to be part of what was called Gran Colombia, which was formed after independence from Spain in 1819 that was led by Simón Bolívar. Gran Colombia was composed of what are now Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Panama, and some parts of Peru, Guyana, and Brazil. These regions eventually split up around the 1830s. Santa Cruz de la Islote is one of Colombia's many islands. It is considered to be the most densely populated island in the world. This island has a population of around 1,200 and is the size of around 2 acres or 2 soccer fields. This island is mostly man-made and has a tight-knit community that doesn't even need police. The Caño Cristales River, also called the River of 5 Colors, is a recently found phenomenon in Colombia. During certain seasons of the year, usually in June and November, the river shows the colors red, yellow, blue, green, and black. The water is very clear and these colors show up because of the reproduction of aquatic plants in the river. Previously, this river was inaccessible due to gorillas spanning the territory, but since 2016, this is cleared up and tourists have been able to view it. We will get into the gorillas later on in this presentation. I am now going to go over the political conflicts in Colombia. We will begin with La Violencia. La Violencia was a civil war that set the path for violence in Colombia. It all began with the liberal and conservative parties fighting against each other using extreme violence that killed many. In 1948, the leader of the Liberalist Party, Jorge Gaitan, was assassinated, sparking further violence. In 1957, the Declaration of Sitges was an agreement between both parties where they would alternate presidencies. This plan was supposed to last for 16 years with 4 presidencies, 2 for each party. In the Colombian election of 1962, conservative Guillermo León Valencia was elected. Within Valencia's first year of presidency, political pressures led to their currency of the peso to devalue. This, combined with increasing inflation, caused unemployment to rise. During this period, Marxist guerrilla groups, inspired by Che Guevara, formed. First started the National Liberation Army, and then formed the Colombian Revolutionary Armed Forces, or FARC. These groups often fought with the government and sometimes with each other. Next, we will go over United States intervention in Colombia, which is intertwined with the political conflicts in Colombia. After La Violencia ended, United States President Eisenhower sent a special survey team comprised of experts on irregular warfare from Europe, Asia, and Latin America. This team recommended for the Colombian government to create a counter-guerrilla combat force, also called paramilitaries, which are underground militaries. The point of the paramilitaries was to fight the guerrillas and any other communist groups. This recommendation to form paramilitaries was a tactic used for counterinsurgency. On the surface, counterinsurgency is shown to provide humanitarian efforts for civilians and save them from their oppression, but in reality, counterinsurgency is messy and deadly. This took place during the time of the Cold War, when the United States wanted to prevent any other nations from becoming communist. Counterinsurgency continued on through to the Kennedy administration, where it was not entirely successful at getting rid of the guerrilla groups in Colombia. Towards the late 20th century, U.S. counterinsurgency tactics began to shift where the divide between civilians and those they were fighting was blurred. They would claim that you were either with us or against us. This led to more civilian deaths. During the entire 50-year conflict, around 260,000 people were killed, where 80% of those deaths were civilian. There were even accusations that the Colombian government would kill civilians and then dress them in FARC uniforms. This graph shows the responsibility for civilian deaths and forced displacement by the guerrillas, military, and paramilitaries in the 1990s. As you can see, the paramilitaries are mostly responsible, especially as the years go by. They can be seen in the yellow bars. In 2016, a peace deal was passed between the Colombian government and the FARC. At first, the deal was rejected by the public, and then after revising the deal with consideration for why some of the public voted no, the new peace deal was passed. In this peace deal, the FARC and Colombian government were expected to help in improving the lives of rural Colombians by providing universal education from preschool to secondary school, guaranteed access to drinking water, and subsidies for development programs in former rebel territories. The FARC would also turn in all of their weapons and information regarding drug trafficking to the United Nations. They would also be allowed to compete in the elections and have 10 seats in Congress. When the 2016 peace deals were signed, there were many promises made, especially to the public. As of May 2019, many rural areas have yet to receive their promised running water, education, and subsidies. Some claim that the government has failed to act during the time of peace, but others say that 2 years is too short for much to be implemented. However, the FARC have made good on some of their promises. The majority of FARC fighters have disarmed, and by 2017, they have had completely demobilized except for a small group. Now there is a vacuum left by the FARC, and some new armed groups have begun to move into these areas. Also, the former FARC members have claimed they are now defenseless against the paramilitaries that are still roaming the countryside. The FARC have also been able to create their own political party, which was promised in the New Deal. They are wildly unpopular because of their history of violence, especially with the civilians. Now we will get into the drug war, which is intertwined with both the political conflicts and the U.S. intervention in Colombia. In the 1980s and 90s, many drug cartels started forming, one of those being the famous Pablo Escobar. Using the anti-narcotics guise, the U.S. still funds counterinsurgency. In 2007, U.S. President Clinton signed a bill providing $1.32 billion to Colombia for counter-narcotic activities, but most of the money went towards the military and police. the U.S. was more focused on economic and electoral interests in Colombia. In an article named Repeating Past Mistakes, Aiding Counterinsurgency in Colombia by Winfred Tate, he stated, counter-narcotics operations supposedly were intended to reduce drug abuse in the United States. But not only have they failed to do so, they have also pumped up abusive militaries, weakened democratic reforms, and exacerbated existing social tensions in Latin America. Today, Colombians do not like hearing about the drug cartels in their country, but it is an important piece of their country's history that should be understood more than that they just have large producers of narcotics. In 1998, the Marshall Plan was proposed to the U.S. President Clinton by the Colombian President Andrés Pastrana. President Pastrana asked President Clinton for support in Colombia's peace process with the FARC and also asked for economic and developmental aid for the coca farmers. Pastrana hoped that the U.S. and other countries would recognize the damage from the drug war in Colombia and help them rebuild like what was done after World War II. It was also a proposed way to help poor coca farmers out of poverty. Coca is in demand and drug traffickers pay better money for it. Poorer farmers grow coca because they need the money, since the market for crops like bananas or coffee are mostly taken over by large corporations. By helping these farmers out of poverty, they will have less of an incentive to grow coca. Instead, the U.S. tripled their military assistance in Colombia. Next, I would like to show my personal experience in Colombia from the summer of 2018. In this photo, I'm posing with some of my family in front of a Chiva bus. These are famous buses of both Colombia and Ecuador that are usually full of color, many times the colors of the Colombian flag, which are red, blue, and yellow. They also carry many goods and even people on their roofs. The name Chiva means goat in Spanish and represents how tough the buses are for the back roads of Colombia. In this photo, I'm in an area called Salento, where they are famous for their horseback riding, hiking trails, and having the tallest palm trees in the world. You can see these trees behind me. This is another picture in the Salento area from the top of a large hill. It shows the valley below and more mountains from the Andean region of Colombia. In the summer, this area is actually at a normal temperature between 65 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Overall, Colombia has had a long period of complicated conflict. Despite these conflicts seeming like they are solely internal matters, the U.S. has had a large impact with its involvement in counterinsurgency. I believe it is important for us to understand Colombia and its conflicts, especially those from the United States whose government has had a hand in its history. It is important to understand that these conflicts do not define the regular citizens of Colombia who are mostly victims or were in some way impacted by the violence. Thank you for listening.